If you've been anywhere on the internet for the past 2 or 3 years, or maybe longer, and you've heard anything about Uncle Roger, anything about rice making, like washing your rice, cooking your rice, measuring your rice, and just rice in general, you've probably stumbled across the technique where you can use your finger to measure the level of water required to cook the rice. Even though I have a lot of confidence in that technique, I want to see, when does the finger trick essentially fail, and if at all. So to test the validity of the finger trick, there's several questions that I feel like need to be answered. The first question is, when using the finger trick to measure out your water, what is the actual ratio of rice to water ratio? And does that match up with the cooking instructions given on the packet of rice you use? The second question is, will this method work for different amounts of rice? Meaning, if I used 1 cup versus 3 cups versus maybe more, will it work, or will the results be wildly different? And lastly, given the same amount of rice, if I cook them in different size pots, will the results be the same? Meaning, if I use 3 cups of rice and I cook them in a small pot, I cooked it in a medium pot and a large pot, will the rice come out exactly the same, or will they all have different results? I actually have a theory about this, but I will get into it later. So for today's test, I'm only going to be using jasmine rice, which is this one. It doesn't have to be this brand necessarily if you guys cook rice at home, but it's what I had on hand, and this is just so I can keep all the tests consistent.
I'm gonna go through the basic methodology for cooking rice real quick. I'm gonna be cooking rice in my rice cooker, but if you don't have that, you can do it in a pot totally fine. So to this rice bowl that came with the rice pot, I'm gonna add 3 cups of rice. Now I'm going to rinse this about 3 to 4 times, and what I'm looking for is for it to be mostly clear. It doesn't have to be perfectly clear. A little bit of cloudiness, like the slightest bit, is fine. For me, I rinsed it about 3 times, and as you can see now, the water is much clearer, and you see how there's a slight bit of cloudiness. That is totally fine. And now I'm going to fill it up with water and measure it using my finger. And as soon as it touches that first index line of my finger, it's ready to be cooked. Which I will do by throwing it in this rice cooker and just closing the lid. And I'm going to set this to the white rice setting. Set it to whatever setting you have, or you might just have one button. Just turn it on and let it cook. And after it is done cooking, let it rest for about 10 minutes to steam all the way through. And once it's been rested, go ahead and fluff it up with a spatula just to get those grains nice and fluffy. Now back to the experiments.
For the first question of what is the ratio of water to rice when measured using your finger, it's going to be a simple test. I'm going to do 2 measurements. I'm going to measure one with 3 cups of rice and one with 1 cup of rice, just to see what the yield is. Okay, so I have 3 cups of rice in here, and all I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna put water in it. I'm not gonna wash it yet and stuff because I'm not cooking it yet, but just fill it up to the first line of my finger, and that should theoretically be the right amount of water. So I'll be right back. So I filled this up with water. Now before we get to measuring, I just wanna mention something real quick. When I fill this up, it doesn't quite hit the first knuckle for me, and that is because I find that rice to be a little too mushy for me, for my personal taste. I'm not saying it's wrong, it's just not for me. I like my rice to be kind of more on the dry side, where you can, like, the individual grains are more distinct. And so I do 3/4 of the way. All right, so that is the baseline I'm establishing. All right, so this was 3 cups of rice, and interestingly enough, using the finger trick, I had 3 cups of water. So for the 1 cup of rice, it actually yielded 2.5 cups of water. That feels like a lot to me. Okay, so this is an interesting find because the 1 cup of rice required 2.5 cups of water, while 3 cups of rice only required 3 cups of water. So that ratio is actually a lot smaller. And I think the reason for that discrepancy is because when you have more rice, it's kind of like adding more ice into a glass of water. You kind of need less water per se. Well, if you have less ice to get to that like top of the glass, you need to fill in more water. I don't know if that was cohesive at all, but I think that's what's happening here. So with the discrepancy in the answer for the first question, the second question, or at least I should say the test for the second question, will be very interesting to see, because now we're gonna cook up 1 cup of rice versus 3 cups of rice, and to see the difference there is gonna be very interesting. Now my hypothesis is that the 1 cup of rice is actually gonna be very mushy when we cook it. It's gonna probably be closer to a porridge or a congee, and the 3 cups of rice, that ratio is gonna give us a nice and fluffy texture. But the only way to find out is to actually cook the rice. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my pot of rice going, and I will get back with the results once it's done cooking. So here we got our rices. This one is the 3 cup of rice one. This one is just 1 cup of rice cooked both in the rice pot. So I don't know if you guys can tell, but this is the 3 cup one. You see how it looks fluffier and the grains are more individual? And then here is the one that was just 1 cup of rice. Can you tell that it's kind of like a bit more mushy, I guess? It's not so bad, but it's mushier. But I think the best way to tell is to just try it. So here's the bite of the 3 cup rice. And then here is the 1 cup one. This is much mushier. So this one, as you're eating in your mouth, you can feel the individual grains, right? And it's like light and fluffy. This is still light. I wouldn't say fluffy, but it has a mushiness to it. It's almost like the texture of a thick rice pudding is what I would say. So as far as results go, it kind of makes sense because the ratio between water and rice for the 1 cup versus the 3 cup, this ratio is a lot higher. And this is more closer to a 1:1 ratio. Therefore, this rice is gonna cook up drier compared to this rice, right? So this is why this is more mushy. Now, based on this, I'm curious to see how the rice will cook up in the different size pots, because I think that would be very interesting to see, despite using the same amount of rice, but just because we're using different vessels, it's gonna make us use different amounts of water. So let's go try that out. Now for the last question, it's pretty much, will this trick work if using different size pots? So these are the 3 pots I am using. This large one, this medium one, and this small one. I think as the pots get bigger, the rice will get mushier. As we saw in the first test, or the first question, the 1 cup, right, in the same size pot, it requires so much more water just to get to that first line on your finger than the 3 cups did. And so by spreading out the rice here thinner, it's gonna produce the same scenario, if that makes sense. To perform this test, what I will do is first get some rice, and I'm gonna go ahead and rinse it. I'm gonna get 9 cups of rice total and rinse that and clean that until it runs clear. And once it does run clear, I'm gonna measure out 3 cups of rice in each of my pots. And then I'm gonna go ahead and fill it up with water until each pot reaches the first index line of my finger. And once that is, I'm gonna bring all of these to a boil. And once it comes up to a boil, I'm gonna reduce them all to a simmer, cover them up all with lids, and then I'm gonna let it cook for 15 to 20 minutes, maybe more depending on how much water has evaporated. Essentially, I want no more water at the bottom, and not dry though, because I don't want the rice to burn. And once it's cooked through, I'm gonna take it off the heat and let it sit for 10 minutes before fluffing it up so that the rice has a chance to steam all the way through, and I can go fluff it up. That way we have a nice and fluffy rice texture. I'm just gonna go ahead and dive straight into tasting these. All right, so this was actually pretty interesting. It was kind of expected though, based on the results from the last test. These two, texture, very, very similar. Like I would say the 3 cups cooked in the medium pot is very, it's slightly more mushy than the 3 cups cooked in the small pot, but very minuscule. Like I wouldn't really think differently if you kind of just threw these in the same bowl and just served it to me. I wouldn't think twice about it. However, this had a noticeable difference going from here to here. Like this had texture still, you could feel the grains. This was like it was mushy, okay? Like thick rice pudding. And I think it's for the same reason as the 1 cup of rice cooked in the rice cooker. It's because you had to use much more water to fill it up to get to that line on your finger, right? So the ratio of water here, ratio of water to rice is much higher here than it is for here and here. So let's run through the recap real quick. In the first question, we set out to find what ratio of water to rice does using the finger trick give you? And I measured out 2 quantities of rice, 1 cup and 3 cups of rice in a standard rice pot in a rice cooker. And what we found out that using 1 cup gives you a 2.5 to 1 water to rice ratio, while the 3 cups only gives you a 1 to 1 ratio. In the second question, we set out to find, does using the finger trick give you the same results for different amounts of rice cooked? And the answer is no. Using 1 cup of rice, right, resulted in a higher ratio of water to rice, which means that that rice will cook up mushier because it has more water to cook in, and it will absorb more water. Whereas the 3 cups of rice has less water, which means it has less water to absorb, which means it has a more, in my opinion, a pleasant texture because you can feel the individual grains, and it's nice and fluffy and light. Now in the third question, it's similar to the second question in the sense of, if I use 3 cups of rice and I cook it in 3 different sized vessels, will that change how it cooks using the finger trick to measure out your water? And the answer is, yeah, it does vary. Now, using a small pot and a medium pot for 3 cups of rice, using the finger trick, there wasn't that much of a difference. Like, it's very negligible in my mind. However, when I was using that really big pot, it mattered actually a lot more because you can tell the difference that that rice is a lot mushier than the other 2. So what does all of this tell you? For me, I think the takeaway should be that wherever pot, whatever thing you cook your rice in, choose a small enough or big enough vessel so that when your rice is sitting at the bottom of it, it's at least a decent layer. So I'm talking like 1 inch to 2 inches thick, and that way the finger trick will be more accurate in measuring the water. So I know this was a bit of a weird video. It was just like a question I had on my mind, but I had fun making it. I had fun figuring out if, yeah, these things actually matter, and to me it matters. And if you liked what you saw, hit the like button below, and then also hit the subscribe, hit the bell so you know when I release new videos, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you, bye.